Hi, Jess. Welcome to When I Grow Up.
Hi, Nicolette. Thanks so much for having me.
I'm so excited for our chat. We met when we studied together in Paris. We had a really good connect and we were good friends. That we had a lot of similar views on things, also a bit of a similar background. The reason that I wanted to bring you on and just pick your brain on all these topics is because you are one of those people that whenever you have a conversation, you walk away so much more energized, motivated, and like you've learned something or gleaned a new perspective on something. And there's just some topics that I just really love to hear your take on. So if we're ready, we can maybe jump in with a little bit of your backstory so we have that as backdrop for this conversation.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for having me and what a kind introduction. I'm excited to talk about some of this. So I'm Jessica. I'm originally from Ohio, a state in the middle of the United States. I currently live in Melbourne, Australia. And if I think back to kind of some of the early influences of my career, as a kid, I was really creative and really artistic. I loved to draw, write. I took all the art classes that were available. I used to go to sports after school, and we lived pretty far away from the school, and my mom would have to come get me after work. And so I'd have to go to the library and sit there from like 4 p.m. until like 8 p.m. or 9 p.m. until my mom could get there. And there's this magazine rack with all the National Geographics, and I used to love to flip through those magazines. And I had this kind of daydream of being a photojournalist. So if I think back to what I wanted to be when I grew up, that's the most prominent memory. But at the same time, I grew up in rural poverty. My parents were high school educated. They were young members of the hardworking but poor class. Very much of the mindset that education was kind of the only way out of our sort of a situation. So I worked really hard in school. I earned a full academic scholarship to university. But when I was deciding what I wanted to study, I mean, photojournalism was there, right, in the back of my mind. But even with a full scholarship, I was very much in a scarcity mindset, super motivated by like what's going to break the poverty cycle, what's going to help me get out of this situation and stay out of it. And I honestly didn't have a lot of exposure to different career paths, but business and accounting specifically was kind of known in my region and had a pretty clear cut path from study to internship to good paying work. So that's what I did. And my first professional job was at Deloitte in international tax planning. I'll do a spoiler alert. I only stayed there about 6 months before I took a hard left turn in another direction. But yeah, that's kind of what shaped my start.
That's so interesting. You used the word scarcity there, and that's something that I really resonate with as well. How did you go into that vision to actually go study abroad? How did you make that a reality? And what was that drive as well into the more impact space?
While I was in university, kind of doing the accounting internships and working towards the degree, something else was also happening. I was super interested in getting out into the world and exploring, and I was really privileged through having the scholarship that I was able to use some of those funds towards study abroad opportunities. So I had a couple of experiences where I studied abroad in multiple countries in South America and South Korea. And particularly in South America, one of the things that connected for me in that experience was seeing other communities experiencing poverty around the world. I think one of the things I've reflected on quite a bit at that time and since has been, being poor in a rich country and being poor in a poor country look different. And that was the first time I was kind of exposed to what being poor in a poor country looks like. And while there were differences, I think what I connected with these communities on was this injustice of the experience of having these invisible chains holding you down. Like people can't really see it on you. You go out and you go to university or you go into a job, people don't really see it, but they're there and they cut off your access to opportunity, your access to resources, access to all sorts of different things. And I thought, okay, I've found this way through to a career that I hope to use to move myself out of this situation. But what's the bigger picture here? What are the systemic ways? Because this is a systemic issue, what are the opportunities to think about systemic solves instead of just, I'm able to get out because I do my accounting degree? And so one of the things that was really impactful for me as I was traveling, particularly in this community in the Peruvian Amazon, was the lack of access to sanitation. As a part of my university degree, I had to complete an honors project. So I used that opportunity to design a social enterprise, a social business model that looked at this problem of access to sanitation in this community. And I was really influenced by the writings of Muhammad Yunus, I think most famous probably for microfinance, but at that time, around 2006, a book had just come out that he had written on social business, this idea that you could, in a financially sustainable way, organize a business whose primary goal was to advance a positive social outcome in a financially sustainable way. And at the same time, as I was graduating and getting ready to move into my full-time role with Deloitte, I also applied for a Fulbright grant. I was awarded a Fulbright grant to move to the Peruvian Amazon and test the feasibility of this business model that I had imagined up and tried to put shape to from, thousands of miles away. At the point that I learned that I was awarded that scholarship, I had been at Deloitte for 6 months, and Nicolette, I hated it. I was so miserable. I spent so much time moving arrows and boxes around like 100-page slide decks. And the whole point of it, the entire point of international tax planning, was to help corporations avoid paying their fair share of taxes by moving it to other countries and using vehicles that would put it in other places in legal ways to help them avoid paying their fair share of taxes that contribute to society. It was so misaligned with what I wanted to be doing. And I didn't feel like I was getting value in it. But it was also this, like, I had made it. I have this job, this kind of prestigious job right out of school at one of the big four accounting firms. And so I also didn't feel like I could just leave it, right? So the Fulbright grant, which is also a bit of a prestigious opportunity, gave me this incredible out. I couldn't just say, I'm out of here. I'm done with this. This sucks. I hate it. That would feel like a quitter and like a loser. But to say, I have this other experience that I just can't pass up was this huge opportunity for me to pivot into this space that I cared so much more about and leave one that I did not care about.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I actually haven't thought about it like that before, but indeed, having this weird, confusing experience of having made it, now I have a great salary, I'm working in the fancy building, but is this what these people do? Like these successful people? This is really not inspiring. That's a really interesting reflection, and we'll get back to some of those decision-making questions. But then just to round out the story after the scholarship.
Yeah. Thanks for giving me the space to share that. So I moved to the Peruvian Amazon. What I can say about that is that I did not solve the problem of access to sanitation in that community. I did not have kind of the magical solution. What I learned there was how important it is to not design things for people from far away, but rather to design things with people based on what makes sense and what their goals and objectives are, et cetera. But I absolutely loved that opportunity. And I felt, wow, this is exactly it. This is what I want to be doing. It's not throwing away the last 4 years or even the 6 months at Deloitte. It's bringing my business skills, my understanding of how business works into this space. But I was missing the other side of it. I didn't have the community engagement skills that I needed, the stakeholder engagement skills. I didn't have a strong baseline for sustainability or social impact. And so I thought, how can I keep going down this path, but equip myself to do so more skillfully? And that's when I decided I would go to Paris and do the master in sustainability. What I loved about the program was that it was in a business school. And it did give me a much broader sense of all of the different kind of applications of quote unquote sustainability across the business architectures. And I think at the end, I wanted to get back into what I really cared about, which was the social enterprise space. And I had an opportunity, although we were not technically MBAs, I did have an opportunity with an organization called MBAs Without Borders. And their role was basically to identify folks with business skills and pair them with social entrepreneurs to help them kind of bring the business pieces of the puzzle to their work. And I got matched with this amazing team of mother-daughter social entrepreneurs in Kerala and South India, working on revitalizing hand weaving as both as a cultural piece of cultural importance to their community, but also revitalizing the livelihoods that went along with it in their community. And gosh, that was such an incredible experience. I mean, it was one of the most beautiful places in the world. The people were amazing. The food was amazing. And this chance to work with these two incredible women. One of them was an anthropologist that had worked with hand weavers, and one of them was a graphic designer. They were working on bringing these pieces of hand weaving to international markets in order to revitalize their culture and livelihoods. And they had so many of the pieces that they needed to bring the impact that they wanted to see in their communities. And it was so meaningful to be able to help them with, probably what felt mundane to them, some of the business pieces, right? Like production planning, like having a marketing plan. But it was just such an incredible opportunity to be the one to help bring those pieces of the puzzle to them. And I loved my experience in India. There was so much innovation and ingenuity happening there, and I really wanted to stay, but I had an opportunity to move to California and work for an organization called Fairtrade Certified as a supply chain program manager. And so this was moving away from social enterprise space towards working with more traditional, large, kind of Fortune 500 CPG type companies, but helping them to partner with their suppliers and the farming communities that they were sourcing their ingredients from in ways that advanced kind of sustainable agriculture, but also greater partnership between these companies and the communities that are actually providing the food in our supply chains. And there are these pretty small shifts that you can make in decision making, that these people have power to make in decision making, that can make massive shifts in communities. I loved that work. I managed commodities that grow in the most beautiful places in the world. So I managed coconut, tea, herbs and spices, and I spent a ton of my time mostly in Asia Pacific. So in the Philippines and Indonesia and tea estates in India and China. It was a really meaningful opportunity to just help create the ecosystem for farmers to organize and take power back for themselves in their negotiation with companies and build partnerships. I loved the work. After several years, I started to feel like a bit burnt out on the time zone changes. And I also found the fair trade model to be just a bit rigid. I think that there were sometimes opportunities that I could see for the communities or the businesses to make decisions that were really meaningful, but they kind of fell outside of the rigidity of the certification model. I wanted to move on beyond just procurement. What are all of the different opportunities and the levers that the business can pull to have positive impacts in the world beyond just its bottom line? And so I moved to an organization called Business for Social Responsibility it's a management consulting firm, but it's organized as a nonprofit. And its mission is to work with business to develop and implement strategies towards a more just and sustainable world. So there I managed projects focused on things like worker well-being in supply chains and living wages and community engagement and social license to operate. And then I evolved into becoming a project director that was leading the work of the organization, specifically at the intersection of our equity, inclusion, and justice practice and tech sector companies. So some really fascinating work there. And that kind of took me up to the point where my partner and I made a major life decision to relocate to Melbourne, Australia. And so I began to explore and start to do kind of freelance consulting and thinking about building a business as a part of my transition across the world and thinking about how to transition my career with me.
I wanted to touch on this concept of agency in your career. And I think both of us shared before that we feel that has been a real journey for us, recognizing that we do have agency and how do you actually use that in your career. From an external observer, it sounds like there was a huge lot of agency taken across that journey. So give us your view as to, in reality, what it feels like to go through those experiences. What has your relationship with agency been like, and how do you reflect back on some of those experiences?
What a good question. To me, agency feels like, if I had to define it, I think I would say it feels like the freedom or personal directive to make decisions as you like. So it's like kind of just my basic definition. As I have this opportunity to reflect on my career, I've always felt a ton of agency, of movement. I guess I'll call it. Like when it comes to deciding to move somewhere else or to move on or to do something else, like, I left Deloitte after 6 months. I felt very free to make that decision. When I finished my Fulbright grant in Peru, hadn't yet, I knew that I wanted to go study elsewhere, but I hadn't secured that. And I very intentionally made the decision not to return to Deloitte because I was fearful that if I returned to Deloitte, I would just stay there. So that was a very intentional decision about not going in that direction. When I decided to leave Fairtrade, I didn't have another job lined up yet. I hadn't had BSR lined up yet, but I knew that I needed the space to think. I wanted to move on and I needed the space to think about what that looked like and what I wanted that to look like. So I think I've always felt a lot of agency in the like, I'm going here, I'm not going here. And there's a lot of privilege, I think, that comes with things like, being financially secure enough to leave a job when you don't have something else lined up, or, not having to think about children or a family that you have to take care of when you're deciding to, move from Peru to Paris or whatever it may be. So I think that kind of agency of movement has kind of come always really natural to me. What I have found to be really important that I wasn't unlocking, that I'd only unlocked like pretty recently, so pretty late in my career, is I think power, recognizing and stepping into and executing, leveraging the power I have to influence what happens inside of a situation, not just leaving a situation, but what's happening in the space I'm in. And so I'll just give you an example of that. I was in one of my roles, I was up for promotion and there was a lot of kind of tumultuous leadership change. And I was just feeling I was complaining to a coach, an amazing coach that I had at the time, just feeling very kind of complainy and annoyed that I wanted the leaders to kind of, care a little bit more and step up and say, help me understand like what a promotion would look like and what the role would look like. And this coach said, I hear how frustrating that situation can be. You feel like you don't have the leadership or the mentorship that's really supporting you in that space. That is really frustrating. And it seems like you may have a lot of autonomy and freedom to design the role that you want to have for this promotion. And that was such a frame shift for me, from feeling like the victim of this absentee leadership to feeling in total control, to step into my power. And without being asked, I designed a role for myself, which, wasn't totally out there. It was within the realm of it. It was very reasonable, but it wasn't a role that had existed. And I defined what I wanted it to be and what I wanted it to be called and what I wanted it to look like and the ways that it would add value to the organization and a different set of teams. And I basically just handed this to the person that I was reporting to at the time. And I said, this is what I want my promotion to look like. I'm happy to discuss it with you. Let me know if you have any questions. And there was like no questions asked, accepted, stamped, approved, promoted. And that was like just such a light bulb moment. And I think, they're not all going to be like that when you exercise your power. Sometimes there will be questions or there will be this moment of this feedback of sure, maybe, but we have to do these things and you have to work towards things in a different way. But that was such a light bulb moment for me of, wow, I was just completely abdicating my own power in this situation to design and take exactly what I wanted. And when I stopped abdicating and I just started stepping into it, I got exactly what I wanted. It made me reflect on all of the times in the past where, did I just leave a role without first like examining how it maybe could have changed to suit me better? So I think that there's agency to make the decisions that you want to make. And then I think there's also this element or this layer of power to influence or shape the things in ways that you want them to be, which are not just like binary decisions of yes or no, go or stay.
Oh my gosh, I just realized that's so interesting. It's, in a sense, if you don't take that power, you're giving it away to someone else. And in a lot of circumstances, they're not even taking that power. They're not even interested. They don't even know that we expect them to take that power. And so it just completely dissipates. And what you triggered there for me was around this concept about making assumptions as well, is that we assume perhaps that someone else is going to take control of a situation, or that they should take control of a situation, that we share the agency over something like a career or a promotion or creating a new role, or even the assumption of what they know about us and what we might be thinking we want to do or what we might be capable of, etc. But people don't think about us that much. They are not taking that ownership and that control of our situation and our vision for where we want to go. The promotion example resonated so strongly with me because early on in my consulting career, I came into a role where we had this discussion. I think it happens so often in consulting, I learned afterwards, where you come in as, let's say, a consultant. They say, okay, I should be a manager is what I'm saying. And they say, yeah, we get you, but, work for a year or so, and then you'll come up for promotion and that will happen. And so being naive, I just went into it and went, okay, great. So we had this conversation during the recruitment process. So when the next promotion cycle comes up, that's the obvious conclusion of it. I've been here for a year. I've shown that I can do the job. I will get promoted. And of course, that didn't happen because that's not how it works. But what I learned afterwards, unpacking it then with my then boss, was that he actually had no idea. He wasn't the person that interviewed me. That information didn't come from somewhere else to him. We didn't have that conversation explicitly because I didn't know that that's what was expected, or that I had the power to actually direct this much older man as to how he had to go into a performance review and speak about me and, kind of taking me that level up. And so there I really learned that lesson, is that no one else is taking that ownership on behalf of you. And it's not a shared ownership. It's really something that you own. Other people can enable you, they can support you, they can help you. But if they don't even know that that is an expectation, it won't get done. I was wondering whether there is any link between authenticity and knowing who we are, the unique strengths that we bring into a workplace, and power. And the way that I'm thinking about it these days is one of the core elements of our power is our authenticity and being really aware of it, but also stepping into it and taking control and agency over our own lives from there.
I think just drawing from my own experiences, what I'll say is, and maybe this is connected with why it took me so long to step into my power, is how do you figure out who you are authentically? Like, when do you know? How often does it change? When you think about like agency and power and like how you cultivate it, like how you get to actually using it and leveraging it, I think there's so much about knowing yourself that enables you to use agency or use power in the ways that are useful for you. So I think like a really simple example is just like knowing how you like to work, right? Over the years, I've realized that I'm a marinator. I can have a conversation or I can read something. Somebody can ask me a question, and the response that I give them will probably be pretty good, but it won't be anywhere as good as it'll be if I have a chance to leave that question in my brain for a week, take it on runs with me or hikes with me, sit with it in the shower, like have an epiphany, like when I'm feeding the dog or whatever, and then coming back to it. So that's something about the way that I work best that I can take into decisions with me. So if I'm evaluating a role or if I'm thinking about a space that I'm working in, am I going to have the opportunity to be a marinator in that role or am I not? I think also having a core set of values that you recognize as core to yourself can really help you make decisions. And so part of agency and using your power is about making decisions. I think there's something really important about these tools that help us know ourselves in order to be able to have agency or leverage power in ways that are aligned with who we are, how we want to live, and how we want to show up professionally.
You articulated it so well. Our authenticity is not only about how we show up in a situation, but it's that really deep knowledge of ourselves. And of course, over time, you become more aware of it and you learn more and you articulate it better for yourself as well. But I think in that exploration, what I've learned as well is that there's no more valid way of being than another. And I think that's something that I struggled with earlier in my career. So it's having that confidence to know that this is as valid and as important as everyone else's values and strengths and skills and personalities. And then have from that place of confidence actually operate and make decisions.
That's such a good point. You just made me think of how you can spend all of your time in making your weaknesses less weak to kind of match maybe some of the strengths of other people. Or you can spend your time making your strengths stronger or using your strengths to, bring gifts to the world or bring your work to the world. Of course, there are probably opportunities to work on your weaknesses here or there in ways that are really important. But I think in alignment with authenticity and power, I would posit that investing in using your strength is the better value or the better investment of your time rather than trying to reduce your weaknesses to model other people's strengths. And there's so much power in that. Once I figured that out, it felt like a huge game changer in terms of what I'm able to do, but also personal happiness in doing it.
Yeah, exactly. And that's your superpower. That's where you get more energy rather than over-indexing on your weaknesses and trying to be a little bit more like everyone else. You can double down and be a hell of a lot more like you and go and have the impact that you can bring to the world. On that point, self-knowledge and having that confidence in what you bring becomes so important when you're starting your own business. And so I'm just curious to learn a little bit about your experience. What were, as you expected it before, and what were some of the really unexpected things, that came up in the process?
It was never really my idea to build a business. When I left BSR, the next logical step for me, the thing I wanted to do was actually go in-house with a company, implement this work in a specific industry context with specific goals and lead a team and do, the implementation. That's what was really exciting or interesting to me. And so the journey towards freelancing and then thinking about building a business was actually really instigated by our move. It was, how do I continue to invest in and grow my career as we make this major life transition? One of the major values I saw in it that interested me was the opportunity to build the life that I wanted. So not just from a wealth building perspective, but the way I wanted to work, how much I wanted to work, with who I wanted to work. What was enticing to me about that was the opportunity to really define those things and the way that I wanted versus having them defined for me by an employer. So I've spent about almost 15 years at the intersection of business and social impact. And when I came out the other side doing freelancing and trying to think about, okay, what are those offerings going to be? One of the things that surfaced for me was the need to better support people in roles of social impact and change making, people trying to bring these important changes into our world, the need to better support them with project management and execution expertise to help them get these changes done faster and more effectively with the kind of support they need to do it, which for me are a combination of one-to-one client work, actually doing this work and bringing them to a broader audience in a one-to-many kind of way. I think in terms of challenges, one of the things that I didn't expect to be as hard as it was actually defining what I was doing, actually crystallizing what value I think I'm bringing to the space specifically and the set of offerings around that. Another thing that just completely took me by surprise, because I have always been a super high performer. I have always just great reviews, great execution, always get the next step or the promotion. And I realized when I started freelancing and then working for myself, I as a person am hugely extrinsically motivated. I am motivated by external factors, by deadlines that serve other people's needs. And I had to do so much work, and it's still work I'm doing to develop intrinsic motivation for my own business, to see myself as a worthy client that should get the same amount of energy and respect from myself to deliver to myself as I do for my external clients. So that was a huge challenge for me. And some of the things that have helped have just been structuring my schedule and trying to do some mind shifts and thinking about how I think about myself. But that was such an interesting learning, how my motivation was oriented extrinsically and what it takes to be accountable to yourself.
Interesting to hear your challenges and how they come from a really deep level. And when you were speaking, I was like starting to, I think, break out in hives a little bit on some of them, especially on the intrinsic motivation, because that's something that I also hadn't realized before. I'm hugely motivated in a lot of ways, but there was something strange that happened when I started working for myself, which was that I still felt really intangible. And if I have to be like, okay, I'm going to go sit and work on my business, or I gave myself a deadline to do a specific piece of marketing or to work on my website or to do social media content. It wasn't like a real deadline. I don't know I don't know how to explain that, but it didn't feel as concrete and as important and something that I just had to kind of keep myself accountable to. And so for me in that process, it was super valuable working with a coach in the first instance. So having someone every 2 weeks that I make some commitments to and kind of outsourcing some of the management tasks. It sounds really silly to say this as a business owner, but outsourcing some of that responsibility to, I'm going to do these 5 things in the next 2 weeks and I'll come give you feedback on it. Or even I'll send them to you, not for input or anything. Of course, it's a coach, that's not her role, but at least to keep me accountable to actually get it done. I would say that was a really big thing. But the other one, and also around this accountability and deadlines really did come with interacting with more people. So in the start, I wanted to do everything alone, and the only people I would really connect with is the clients. Whereas I think spanning that net wider, joining some of the more networking opportunities, even the two of us connecting and me saying out loud all the things that I'm going to do. At the outset, I was a bit nervous about how people would think about what I'm doing. So I kept a lot of it to myself and even some of my ideas. But the more I started speaking about it confidently to friends, to past colleagues, or people that I'm networking with, I just put it more and more out into the world, which made it more real and more concrete and helped me to actually see those deadlines as important as well. And so it's really a journey. And I do think that is one of the hardest things of building your own business. The money will come, if you've got a good idea. It will take a lot longer, perhaps, than you think. And I think you rightly called out there that even shaping that idea, we sometimes think, I'm going to shape the idea, then I'm going to quit my job and go implement that idea. No, that's the start. Having the initial idea is the start. So make sure that you can either start doing it next to your job or that you have a proper runway or other backups, because it will take longer. But then I think, it is that intrinsic motivation to build the business and to keep on persisting, even when it feels messy and unclear and not tangible or real, even in a sense. I don't know, maybe to some people that might sound completely silly, but that's been my experience.
Yeah, and I so resonate with the examples that you shared too, because as I was struggling with the defining and the crystallizing of the business, what am I even talking about here? The thing that unlocked that for me was joining it was called a Magic Mind, but it was basically a group of 6 other entrepreneurs in a 6-month container that were working on taking their businesses to defining them and taking them to the next level. And so it was having the bi-weekly calls with that group that gave me the account. I would say, I'm going to do this thing. And, we might all be doing different things because we had different businesses, but we were all kind of creating accountability for each other. And that was the process of that was what helped me to be accountable to myself, and also hearing other entrepreneurs or solopreneurs' stories and journeys and what they were experiencing and chatting with you and hearing yours just unlocked so much more thinking. There was so much opportunity to learn from what somebody else had learned a moment earlier and, extrapolate and apply it to my situation.
We're coming to the end of the conversation, Jess. Still had so many different questions, but I think at some point we might have to wrap this up and do a part 2 in the future. Yeah. So just checking in with you whether there's anything that you haven't shared yet that you feel is important to share with the audience before we round up.
I guess one thing I can share that I think I have learned over the course of my career It's just the importance of relationships. It wasn't something that was natural to me kind of in the beginning of my career. I didn't come from a home in a community where like I didn't understand the importance of social capital. We didn't have friends of your parents that were helping to connect you with the right internships and opportunities, and understand like how important that was in the world. So one of the things that's been really a meaningful community for me to be involved in is the Girls Club Collective community, which is a space, it's billed as a feminine leadership lab for change agents. And one of the things I think is really special about that is we borrow from Adrienne Marie Brown's definition of feminine leadership. So it's not just women leaders, but it's leaders that shift our understanding of how power can be held, uplifting power that emphasizes things like humility and quiet power versus the loudest person in the room, and care for others. But the collective is a space that's largely curated for folks that are working in social impact and change making, and a space where we work to just uplift and support each other on personal and professional levels. And I think having access to a community like that, especially as I moved into a moment in time for myself where I'm not on a team, I'm not inside of an organization, has been hugely, hugely impactful.
So we're going to wrap up on a few rapid fire questions. You ready?
Good. Yeah, I'm ready.
The first one is, if you didn't have to work, what would you be doing with your time?
Traveling and writing about it.
Love it. Second one, if you had to choose one of your past jobs to do for the rest of your life, which one would it be?
I think fair trade. I think there were just so many elements of that work that connected so deeply with who I am and what I want to be true in the world. And I think with the skill sets I have now, I could really do it justice.
The third one, if you could have a do-over for one of your career decisions, which one would it be?
So I don't know if you know about this about me, but I'm like a tiny bit of a sci-fi geek. So I take really seriously the ramifications of messing with the space-time continuum. So I believe it, if you change one thing, you change all things. So I don't think I would change anything. But to answer your question seriously, I do think about when I took that left turn out of accounting. I told you I hated what I was doing at Deloitte, but there was another offer on the table for me at Ernst & Young. And I passed on it because it was in auditing and it didn't have international title. But there was a partner there that interviewed me that took a huge interest in me. And when I passed, he made a personal appeal for me to reconsider, saying that they had operations all throughout Latin America and that he could guarantee that I would have opportunities to do the work internationally. Anyways, 20 years later, now that I see the way that sustainability and social impact are finally connecting with accounting and the way businesses are thinking about accounting for the materiality of those things in their business, I just sometimes wonder if I might have pursued what I cared about from that angle way, way, way back then. But generally, I wouldn't change anything.
Fourth one, if you could go back in time and give your younger self one piece of career advice, what would you say?
I would tell myself to shift the framing in my mind from why you to why not you. Can I share a story about that? Okay. So the framing that I entered my young adult life with was, you're not special. In fact, remember that you've got major disadvantages, right? Like you have to accommodate for the fact that you're coming from poverty, you're coming in as a first generation college student. So you better take safe bets, you better work 10 times as hard. And looking back, I would just tell myself to shift to why not you? And I think it's still like in a logical frame. I just think back to the decision of, I had a full scholarship to college and I still thought photojournalism was unrealistic. In my community, it was like arts degrees don't pay, writing's not going to pay. Maybe only 5% of people or 10% of people make it and get the dream jobs. But if I look back, I was valedictorian of my high school. So that was the top 0.5%. I scored in the 95th percentile for my exams. I was one of 6 people in a university of 24,000 that got a full scholarship to college. So why did I think that I couldn't be in the top 5 or 10%? Because I had this why you're not special mindset. And I would just say, like, maybe first, don't be crazy, don't be illogical, but like, think why not you? And maybe let that be how you evaluate decisions.
Yeah, got a bit of goosebumps. And the word that came up for me was modeling, that you didn't have that modeling in your community of people doing all sorts of things and being successful. But you were that model. You were doing all those things. But it's hard to recognize it in real time. And it's only in retrospect that you can go back and go like, shit, I actually did all of these things. And that was pretty remarkable. That's beautiful. Thanks for sharing that. So we're going to end off on the very last one, which is for you to complete the sentence. When I grow up.
When I grow up, I'll be exactly who I want to be, no matter how often that changes.
I love that. Awesome. Thanks so much, Jess. Thanks for coming on today and sharing your story, all of these important lessons that you've learned. Took a lot from that. I learned a lot. I have a lot of notes, and I feel like there is a part 2 somewhere in the future.
Well, I learned so much from your questions and your sharing of your story back. So thank you for having me on. I really, really enjoyed it.
Thanks, Jess. Chat soon.